As the 20th century comes to an end and the world enters the next millennium, age-old traditions everywhere are threatened. One such place is the Republic of Benin in West Africa. Benin is a country of 5 million people. More than 50 languages can be heard on its streets. In the port city of Cotonou, the modern world is fast approaching. From its foundation as an independent chiefdom, through its eventual colonization by the French, to its recent struggle for self-determination and nationhood, the Republic of Benin now faces its greatest challenge, posed by a fast-changing world. At the heart of the Republic of Benin lies the city of Abomey, capital of the former kingdom of Dahomey. For over 300 years, from within this walled royal compound, the ancestors of the Fan people ruled one of the greatest kingdoms in sub-Saharan Africa. Today, this compound serves as a ceremonial center for the Fan people and houses the Museum of Abomey. The Royal Palaces of the Kingdom of Dahomey have been preserved by the museum. Their architecture represents a high level of artistic sophistication. The walls of these earthen palaces were decorated with bas-reliefs that depicted key events in the history of the kingdom. Like small windows through which we catch glimpses of the Fan culture, these bas-reliefs tell vivid stories that together make up a unique cultural heritage, a legacy that is still transmitted from generation to generation through oral traditions. But time has taken its toll on some of the oldest ones. In 1988, the Hall of Jewels was slated for major repairs. Its bas-reliefs were the oldest existing royal bas-reliefs of the Fan people. To preserve these original works, the museum detached them and mounted them in cement casings. Reproductions replaced the originals on the reconstructed Hall of Jewels, while the oldest bas-reliefs were stored here, awaiting conservation. In 1991, the government of Benin and the Los Angeles-based Getty Conservation Institute began a program to conserve these royal bas-reliefs from Abomey. This ambitious project blends the meticulous science of conservation with a fascinating journey into the world of the Fan people. The Kingdom of Dahomey occupied most of the territory of today's Republic of Benin. In the 15th century, as a result of disputes in the ruling family of Alada, two princes left and founded rival chiefdoms at Porto Novo and Abomey. Eventually, the chiefdom at Abomey grew into the powerful and wealthy Kingdom of Dahomey. The first royal palace of Dahomey was constructed at Abomey in 1645. From then on, each king built his palace near that of his predecessor, making this royal compound the nerve center of the kingdom. One of the last to be built was for King Glele, who reigned between 1858 and 1889. The present king, Agoliagbo Dejalani, is a direct descendant of Glele, but he lives here, outside the royal compound. Although the dynasty still exists, its power has been reduced. Today, the Republic of Benin has an elected government. In 1985, international attention was drawn to the Museum of Abomey and the Royal Palaces when they were listed as one of UNESCO's World Heritage Sites in Danger. A few years later, King Glele's Hall of Jewels had to be torn down, putting in jeopardy some of the oldest bas-reliefs. Léonard Ahonon, curator of the Museum of Abomey at the time.
La Salle de Bijoux était tombée en ruine.
The Hall of Jewels was in ruins, so to proceed in the work of restoration, we felt the need to save the bas-reliefs. In order to do this, we had to remove them.
This was the first time original bas-reliefs were preserved as objects of art, rather than an architectural feature. But during transportation, 6 were completely lost, and many others suffered serious structural damage. In the autumn of 1993, a team from the Getty Conservation Institute, headed by Leslie Rayner and Francesca Piquet, launched the first conservation campaign in Abomey at the invitation of the government of Benin. The detachment of the bas-reliefs from the walls had marked a turning point for the Beninois in preserving their cultural heritage. So believes the director of the Department of Cultural Patrimony, Rachida de Souza.
The Getty Conservation Institute was one of the institutions that responded favorably to our appeal and which encouraged us to undertake research, training and conservation, both preventive and long-term, of these elements at the site.
But look, the structural, we're going to have to lay this one down before we can even move it. No way. I mean, look, it's just trash. In pieces.
Before the bas-reliefs were removed to the studio, some of them required emergency treatment. This became the first step in the conservation project.
The first operation is to remove the dust. The problem then is how to deal with the flaking paint. These can be fixed either with an emulsion adhesive, which we can introduce with a syringe, or if there's a larger gap, we can use a finely sieved earth that can be introduced behind the flake with a paintbrush. At this point, the bas-relief is ready to be faced with Japanese paper and to be transported.
In Benin, no one had ever conserved a bas-relief as a museum object, as the Getty conservators dared to do. The challenge was to treat 50 bas-reliefs, which were heavy, fragile, and in various states of disrepair. In the worst cases, fragmented panels had to be reassembled piece by piece. During the conservation process, each of the 300-kilo bas-reliefs needed to be moved 2 or 3 times. The conservation team used a mock bas-relief made specifically to test the safety of the pushcart and the pulley system before transporting the original bas-reliefs. In 1911, French author Waterloo documented the royal bas-reliefs from Abomey. His book and photographic records helped the conservators research the history of these bas-reliefs and understand the causes of their deterioration.
We noticed, for example, that the roofline was changed, and it went from being a very steep sloping pitched roof to a much higher roof, which left the bas-reliefs more exposed to the elements.
And of course, we always have to remember that we're talking about earth and materials. And earth is definitely very sensitive to water. As soon as it gets water, it swells, move, and then dries up again. And all of these movements are reason for deterioration.
Studying the environmental factors in the region helped the Getty team determine an appropriate treatment plan for the bas-reliefs.
Leslie, come and see what happened to these samples with the rain.
Conservators wanted to use materials compatible with the color and texture of the original artifacts. Samples from the local quarry at Abomey were analyzed at the Getty lab in Los Angeles.
We found the two to be very similar in terms of particle size distribution and the mineralogical composition and the color.
Because the original bas-reliefs were being conserved, artist Cyprian Tokudagba was commissioned by the Museum of Abomey to make permanent replacements for display in the newly reconstructed Hall of Jewels. Over a period of 2 years, he and his family crafted replicas of the 56 original bas-reliefs using traditional local materials.
Dans l'ancien temps, nos ancêtres rois
In the old times, when our ancestor kings commissioned bas-reliefs for the temples or museum, one would mix earth with palm oil and apply this mixture to the motif, so that if the rain hits, it would prevent the bas-relief from dissolving, as it would with just plain earth.
While the conservators work on the oldest bas-reliefs from the Royal Palaces of Abomey, Cyprian brings forward a central tradition of the Fon culture. Although earthen panels are found in other parts of West Africa, only in the Dahomey Kingdom did they develop into a powerful visual language. But what are the origins of the royal bas-reliefs of Abomey? In a culture that had no formal writing, oral tradition holds the only answers. For Nandishao Bashalou, a renowned historian of Dahomey's oral traditions, the bas-reliefs add a three-dimensional depth to the songs and stories that chronicle the kingdom's history.
The king also went to war. He had promised to defeat the warriors who were threatening to invade the country, saying that his people would be ready to face them. If they attack, we will be like the eagle in the sky, which attacks its prey and takes it away high in the air.
Nous serons comme l'aigle et nous les emporterons très haut.
From among the peoples they conquered, the kings of Abomey recruited talented artisans to work for them.
Et nous avons ici son représentant, le représentant Akati.
This is the home of the Akatis, a family of blacksmiths. Their ancestors were brought to Abomey to forge precious metals for the kings. The best example of their craft is this god of metallurgic Goût, sculpted for King Glele in the mid-1800s. Besides their technical skills, these artisans brought with them something else, their religion, voodoo. Many new deities were introduced to Abomey by captives taken in war, expanding the local pantheon and making Abomey the crossroads of sacred energies. Historian Joseph Adande believes that bas-reliefs were first created for the voodoo temples and that the kings adopted this religious art form for their own purposes.
Chaque fois que les rois du Dahomey allaient en guerre,
every time when the kings of Dahomey went to war, they brought back to their kingdom the best things from those they conquered. That is how a number of divinities found their way to Dahomey. From Dassa, for instance, they brought a slave who carried within her luggage the god she venerated.
But it was not the symbolic spiritual imagery of the religious bas-reliefs that the kings borrowed from the voodoo temples. It was instead the medium that interested them. Bas-reliefs started to appear on palace walls around 1708, during the reign of King Agaja, who chose a ship as one of his symbols. He was the first king of Dahomey to have contact with Europeans, who arrived on the African coast by boat. Agaja and later kings continued to use bas-reliefs to convey secular messages about their personal power and military prowess. It was military superiority that gradually made Abomey into one of the most powerful kingdoms in West Africa. Dahomeyan kings had female bodyguards, and entire regiments of women soldiers armed with machetes and guns were highly trained and dangerous in battle. An Amazon said, "I've heard that the king wants to build Chejan temple with human blood." Armed with a hoe and a sword, she eviscerated the first warrior she killed. Then she put soil in the man's belly and kneaded the dirt with human blood. The women soldiers were only one tool that King Agaja used to expand the kingdom of Dahomey. During his reign, he conquered the two major chiefdoms of Alada and Ouida and incorporated them into his state. Every 10 years, modern Beninois commemorate this common ancestry by holding a ceremonial gathering of all the tribal kings of the country. Bringing water from all regions, the kings and their people gather in Alada, the great brother of all the kingdoms.
La cérémonie qui se tient aujourd'hui, le 10 décembre,
the ceremony taking place today, the 10th of December, is a ceremony of offerings of drinks designed to feed the ancestors in the other world.
aux ancêtres qui sont dans l'au-delà. Nous rencontrons les porteuses d'eau lustrale.
We see the women carrying containers of holy water on their heads, with their mouths closed. Their mouths contain a small leaf, indicating that this carrier does not speak to anyone. As the pots are removed from their heads and the leaves taken away from their mouths, they are free to speak.
As in centuries past, the oral tradition remains central. While the conquest of Alada gave King Agaja dominion over the spiritual birthplace of Abomey, the annexation of the coastal city of Ouida brought him into contact with the sea, the Europeans, and a lucrative new trade. The cotton fabrics, tobacco, alcohol, and firearms that the Europeans brought to Ouida did not cost money. They were paid for with men. Dahomey shipped an average of 10,000 prisoners a year across the ocean to provide manpower for the mines and plantations of the New World. For Grégoire Aguidissou, a son of Ouida, this is the road where their fateful journey began.
Cette place-là nous rappelle que c'est la porte de non-retour.
This place reminds us that this is the door of no return. The slaves here were looked for in far-reaching areas of the country. And when they arrived here, they are embarked. They do not know where they are going, and they are never sure to return to their country.
C'est pour cela que l'État béninois, dans le sens,
this is why the Benin government, in order to make known to history and posterity what really happened in the slave trade, decided to create this monument.
la traite négrière a voulu fixer ce monument-là.
After weeks of meticulous work, the conservators slowly begin to expose the artist's original creation.
In this case, all the base was definitely built up with the added support to cover some of the original niche.
Now Francesca can begin to identify the original parts of the bas-relief and remove all the extraneous materials covering the image.
I can clearly see all the edges of the original paint layer left.
Although conservators today strive for minimal intervention, sometimes a damaged frame needs major structural reinforcement. Conservator Stephen Rickerby had to rebuild most of the support for this bas-relief.
This is the condition of the bas-relief when it was still outside after its detachment. And when this came back into the studio, we basically took away many of the fragments from the lower part of the relief. So these legs and this torso and the gun and the legs here, leaving the whole lower half of this relief with really nothing there, going all the way back to the base.
Stephen would work several weeks reinstating the structural stability of this bas-relief. Then he would begin repositioning the fragments in their original location. As the team makes painstaking efforts to conserve these bas-reliefs, nearby Cyprien continues a tradition that began more than 400 years ago. I am strong as the buffalo, for I could destroy all the hunters who were following me and take my pride back into my country. Those are the words of King Agaja's great-grandson, King Gezo, and they mark a turning point for the Fon people. In 1818, King Gezo inherited a kingdom far weaker than it had been 100 years earlier. During Gezo's 40-year reign, he broke his kingdom's economic dependence on the slave trade and laid the basis of Dahomey's modern economy. Gezo encouraged the production of palm oil and other agricultural products. he was able to create a new sense of national pride and power.
Et quand le roi Guézo a fait cette victoire, il a demandé la réunion
When
de tout
King
le peuple
Getzo
à la
obtained
devanture
this
du palais.
victory, he asked the people to gather in front of his palace and said the people were not free. They were like birds without a perch.
Et maintenant,
And now, he said, I have given you freedom.
notre liberté
Our freedom
est
can be compared to a
comparable
jar
à
with
une
many
poterie
holes which
perforée
cannot
de
hold
nombreux
water.
trous. Et une poterie perforée de nombreux trous ne peut pas contenir de l'eau. Et pour
If each
donner
one of
l'exemple,
you,
il
the
a
sons
dit,
of this
si
nation,
chacun de
can
vous,
put his
les
finger
fils
in
du
one
pays,
hole,
arrive à boucher chacun
the
un
jar
trou
will
de son
hold the
doigt,
water.
chacun un trou de son doigt, chacun un trou, et si on y met de l'eau,
It
elle va
represents the
contenir.
concept of
Et c'est
unity
le signe de
and
l'union
strength.
fait la force.
The spirit of unity inspired by King Getzo lives on today. His descendants continue to use the royal palaces as sacred links to the past. What was once reserved only for divine kings is now open to all and embraces the cultural legacy of the Fan people. As important as the labor of physical conservation is, equally important is the training of museum staff from Benin so that they can carry on the work after the Getty conservators leave.
I would suggest placing your fingers in a way that you feel where it is at the maximum width and then bring them back. Be careful not to cut your fingers because film does not respond well to blood. It's the first step in the process. First comes developing the film, then making a contact print, then making an enlargement. But the success of all the subsequent...
Because photographic documentation of the conservation process is essential, Susan Middleton is giving the trainees classes in technical photography.
Really concentrate on the detail of their condition. And we use nomenclature with color bars, grayscale, centimeter scale, and a numerical designation, as well as the month and year and whether it's before or after conservation treatments.
The bas-reliefs being conserved are from the palace of King Getzo's son, King Lele. During his reign, Lele kept the political gains of his father, but following his death, the era of Fan dominance in the region came to an end. In 1892, King Lele's son, Behanzan, ordered the city of Abomey burned to keep it from falling into the hands of French colonizers. His own royal palace was destroyed. Behanzan compared himself to a shark. I will not let any ship approach that comes to make war against my kingdom. I will drown them. Despite Behanzan's heroic stand, in 1894 France overpowered Dahomey and claimed it as a French protectorate. Behanzan was exiled, and his brother Ago Liagbo ascended the throne. took the broom as one of his symbols, meaning that he could boldly sweep away his enemies, whether they came from inside or outside the kingdom. 100 years later, the people of Benin and Agoli Agbo Dejalani commemorate the enthronement of his great-grandfather Agoli Agbo. Constance Sampson, a member of the royal court.
This ceremony goes back to the time King Agoli Agbo became king of Dahomey. He said, "I'm going to commemorate this event because, due to the colonial wars, it was not easy to regain the throne, because all the palaces were destroyed and he had to rebuild everything." He said to himself, "I'm going to celebrate this big event and the victory over the French, who, after the war, complied with our wish to continue our own traditions."
Plain red earth, and we have to put it on layer by layer in order to build it up.
The final phase of conservation is the surface treatment. The conservators' aim at this stage is not to hide their handiwork, but to leave it readable to the viewer while keeping the traces of time visible.
Here, for example, we have the red. And much before that red, there was the white, and over the red there is a green layer, and then over this layer there's another darker green layer. Each time the surface degraded, people used to come and paint over it.
After their fifth field campaign on the Abomey project, Dorothée, Justin, and Léonard are prepared to perform conservation treatment of the bas-reliefs on their own. Soon they will be training others.
His Majesty says that the joy is shared. All the population of the entire kingdom is in joy also. Because, referring to our past conflicts with Europeans, we could not imagine that one day whites and blacks would be able to collaborate as they do presently. Therefore, what took place today must continue beyond our generation.
Maintenant, on est après le traitement,
Donc, normalement, lui doit retenir encore.
Oui. It's very interesting to see the impact of our project in the trainees, because they're slowly, now we are at the fifth campaign, they are starting to come to us with new ideas on other projects, on other cultural heritage in Benin. We know that all the kings also had private palaces, which are distributed around Abomey. And the other bas-reliefs are there in those other private palaces.
Effectivement, dans les palais privés, les bas-reliefs que nous avons sont différents.
Indeed, the bas-reliefs in the private palaces are different from the ones here at the museum, especially in the motifs. It's important to undertake actions to conserve them so that they do not exist only in books or photos. These originals should be conserved as they are. We've also had training on the impact of salts on the bas-reliefs, and this can be applied here in Quetou. I think the work we carried out together as a team was good. It is fascinating, and it's been a great asset in my training.
When it came time to document the last set of conserved bas-reliefs, I realized that our work in Benin was coming to a close. But at the same time, it was just beginning, because our Beninois collaborators, Léonard, Dorothée, and Justin, were initiating projects of their own. So it's very gratifying to realize that through our collaboration, they have acquired the skills to document their own culture from their point of view. After these years of work, we were leaving behind a set of bas-reliefs that will be seen, hopefully, by not only the people of Benin, but by all visitors to the museum.
While the reconstructed Hall of Jewels exhibits replicas of the original bas-reliefs, not far away, this building will house the recently conserved bas-reliefs.
The bas-reliefs are so important to us because they are our history told on walls, and that's why we preserve them. We preserve them as a cultural patrimony.
The conservation of the royal bas-reliefs of Abomey is just one example of what the people of Benin are doing to preserve their past, and with that, their cultural identity. Their rich heritage may help guide them in the choices they make about their future. For by conserving the traditions and artifacts left to them by history, each new generation can rediscover the insights and wisdom that endure.